Tuesday, February 6, 2024. 9:47 in the morning. Fourth floor conference room, Hartwell Community Bank, downtown Columbus. The application on my desk was for $52,000. The name on it was mine. My name is Vivian Alcott. I am 38 years old. And the woman who had forged my signature, stolen my social security number, and used my identity to take out a loan 3 years earlier was seated 15 feet away from me, wearing a blazer she had bought specifically for this meeting. She did not know I was coming. She did not know I was on the board. She did not know that the regional lending division she had applied through had been absorbed 2 years prior into the very institution where I had spent the last decade building something she had never once thought to look for. She thought she was meeting with a loan officer. She thought, as she had always thought, that I was somewhere in the background. Manageable. Quiet. The sister who sent money home and asked for nothing and would eventually, like she always did, find a way to absorb whatever damage had been done and carry on. What she did not know was that I had been waiting for that Tuesday morning for 14 months. Not with anger. Not with a plan for revenge. With documentation. 41 pages of it, bound in a manila folder, sitting inside the leather portfolio I set on the conference table when I walked to that door. This is that story. I grew up in a 4-bedroom house on Fieldcroft Drive in Gannett, Ohio, the younger of 2 daughters. My parents, Gerald and Pamela Alcott, were practical people. My father worked 31 years as a facilities manager for the Columbus Metropolitan Library System. My mother managed the front desk at a pediatric dental office for most of my childhood. They were not wealthy, they were stable, which in our neighborhood meant the same thing. The house was kept, the cars were paid off a year before they should have been. There was always enough. My sister Autumn was 2 years older than me, which in the economy of our household meant she had arrived first and established the terms. She was louder than me, more comfortable in rooms, better at the particular performance of being liked. She had our mother's instinct for presentation, the right outfit, the right story, the right version of events delivered to the right audience. Growing up, I understood this without resenting it. Some people are built for the front of the room. I was built for the work that happens before anyone walks in. I graduated from Ohio State in May of 2012 with a bachelor's degree in finance. I was 26 years old. I had worked 2 part-time jobs through most of my junior and senior years to avoid taking on more debt than I had to. And I had graduated with a GPA that I kept to myself because I had learned early that accomplishment, announced in that house, had a way of being redirected. The week I graduated, my parents gave me a card with $200 in it. I was grateful. I meant that. 2 days later, I was standing in the hallway outside the kitchen and I heard my mother telling our neighbor, Doris Fenn, that Autumn was the one who really had a head for money. That Vivian's degree was just a piece of paper. That Autumn had real instincts. Autumn was in the kitchen. She heard every word of it. She smiled and said nothing. I folded that moment up and put it somewhere small and kept moving. I started at Meridian Financial Services in Columbus that August as a junior compliance analyst at $41,000 a year. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate named Casey who worked in hospital billing and kept her own hours. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a dent above the rear left wheel well that I never got fixed because it did not affect the function of the car. I sent $300 home to my parents every month because I believed at 26 that family meant sacrifice. And I had no evidence yet that the sacrifice only moved in one direction. I also, from that first August, put 18% of every paycheck into a Roth IRA and a separate investment account, not because I had been told to, because I had read enough in 4 years of finance coursework to understand that the distance between where I was and where I wanted to be would be covered in small, consistent, unremarkable steps taken over a very long time. I had no shortcuts. I had a spreadsheet and a direct deposit and a willingness to be patient in ways that would have bored most people I knew. By 2014, I had been promoted to compliance officer. I was 28. I was making $54,000 and I had begun to understand the architecture of institutional lending in a way that most people in my office had not yet thought to pursue. I read every regulation update. I annotated the ones that mattered. My manager, a man named Douglas Hart, who had been in financial compliance for 22 years and had seen most things, told me once that I read documents the way surgeons read scans, looking for the thing that shouldn't be there. I took that as the highest compliment he could have given me, and I did not tell anyone he said it. That same year, at the graduation dinner my parents hosted for me 2 years late because my mother had finally gotten around to planning it, Autumn sat across the table and waited. She waited while my father gave a short toast. She waited while my mother passed the rolls. She waited approximately 4 minutes after I mentioned my promotion before she pivoted, smoothly and without visible effort, to a brand partnership she was close to landing with a home goods company. The room shifted toward her the way rooms always shifted toward her, and I watched it happen from across the table and understood, for the first time with complete clarity, that this was not accidental. This was the way she managed the world, not by building, by redirecting. The brand deal never materialized, it never did. In 2017, 3 years into what had become a reliable pattern, Autumn called me on a Wednesday night crying. She had married Wesley Pruitt in 2015, a man who sold HVAC systems and had an easy laugh and a long history of agreeing with whoever was in the room with him, needed a co-signer on a new apartment lease. Their credit scores were too low. She said she had nowhere else to turn. She said she would handle everything. She said it would not affect me at all. I co-signed. Because she was my sister and she was crying and I had not yet accumulated enough evidence to override the part of me that still believed in the version of family my parents had described to us as children. Autumn and Wesley were late on rent for the first 6 months, not by days, by weeks. It appeared on my credit report like a small bruise that kept being touched before it could heal. When I called Autumn to discuss it, she said, "You've always been so dramatic about money. Not everything is a transaction, Vivian." I did not respond. I made a note of the date, the time, and the exact words, not because I planned anything. Because I had a compliance brain and compliance brains document. In 2018, I was promoted to Vice President of Institutional Lending at Meridian. My salary moved to $112,000 with a performance bonus that averaged $18,000 annually. That spring, I purchased my first rental property, a duplex in Westerville, a suburb northeast of Columbus, for $187,000. I had been saving the down payment for 4 years. I put 20% down. I had a property manager lined up before I closed. The duplex was fully leased within 3 weeks. I bought my second rental property in 2020, a single-family home in Reynoldsburg. By then my name had appeared in 2 industry trade publications and I had been appointed to an advisory panel for the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions. None of this was announced at Sunday dinner. Autumn did not read trade publications. Our mother did not know what the Ohio Division of Financial Institutions was. I did not explain it. I brought wine and I asked Autumn about the blog and I helped with the dishes and I drove home in the dark and I thought about my spreadsheet. In 2019, at a Sunday dinner I should not have attended, I told the family about my VP promotion. I had earned it over 6 years of work that had required me to be in the office before most people arrived and to understand things about institutional risk that I had taught myself from textbooks and case studies and 2 certifications I had pursued on my own time. I mentioned it over the pasta course quietly because I was not built for announcements. Autumn waited 4 minutes. She pivoted to a brand deal. The room followed. At the end of the evening, as I was putting on my coat in the hallway, Autumn said to her mother, not quietly, not by accident, "She's always needed everyone to clap for her. It's exhausting." Our mother laughed. I finished buttoning my coat. I said goodnight. I drove home. I did not cry. I did not make a call. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for 6 minutes and I thought about the duplex in Westerville and the second property I was 2 years away from purchasing in the advisory panel and the 12 years that were still ahead of me and what I was going to make of them. Then I went inside. In the spring of 2021, Autumn Alcott Pruitt used my full legal identity, my name, my social security number, my former Columbus address, and a forged copy of a pay stub to obtain a $52,000 personal loan from a regional lending division. The stated purpose on the application was home renovation. The actual use was debt consolidation, a family vacation to Cancun in March of 2021 that she posted about extensively under the hashtag Chosen Abundance, and a $9,400 deposit on a venue for a vow renewal ceremony she never held. I know this because I eventually read every document. I read everything twice. I did not know any of it until July of 2022. If you are still with me right now, I want to ask you to take a second and leave a comment below. Tell me whether you have ever had a moment where you discovered that someone you protected had been using your trust as a transaction. You do not have to share details. Just tell me if you know this feeling. And if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, please do. These stories matter, and your being here is what makes it possible to keep telling them. I was sitting in a glass-walled office at a lending firm in July of 2022 when my mortgage broker, a methodical man named Paul Garrett who had helped me refinance once before, slid a printout across the table and said, "There's a delinquent account here under your name. Did you know about this?" I looked at the printout. The loan amount was $52,000. The originating lender was a regional division I recognized immediately because I had reviewed dozens of their filings in my advisory role. The account was 14 months delinquent. I said, "No, I did not know about this." I said it the way I say everything, evenly. Because what I felt in that moment was not shock, it was confirmation. There is a difference between the two, and anyone who has spent years quietly watching a person reveal themselves will understand it. Shock is what you feel when something comes from nowhere. Confirmation is what you feel when the thing you have been hoping would not be true finally declares itself plainly, and you realize you have been prepared for it for a long time. I asked Paul to pause the refinancing review. I drove back to my office. I closed my door. I called an attorney named Lorraine Vega, who specialized in financial fraud cases and had been referred to me 2 years earlier by a colleague who described her as someone who moved slowly and won completely. I explained the situation in 4 minutes. She said to touch nothing, file nothing, say nothing to anyone until we spoke in person. I had an appointment with her the following Monday. The credit drop was 94 points in a single reporting cycle. It delayed my refinancing by 7 months and cost me approximately $14,000 in rate terms. More significantly, I was in the middle of a board nomination process at that point, a process that required a comprehensive financial review. A delinquent account in my name, even one I had not created, triggered a full disclosure review that added 4 months to my timeline and very nearly ended the nomination before it began. Very nearly. I told the board's review committee the truth in a single meeting. I presented the fraud report. I presented the documentation Lorraine had already begun assembling. I presented my 12-year financial record, which was otherwise without a single mark. The review took 4 months. In November of 2023, the board of Hartwell Community Bank confirmed my appointment as a board director. My name appeared in their annual report, on their website, and in 2 regional business publications. Autumn did not know. Autumn did not read business publications. Autumn had not searched my name online since 2019 when she had checked, apparently, to see whether I had said anything about her. I know this because Lorraine's team found the search in the course of the investigation. It is the kind of detail that stays with you. During the 14 months between the discovery and the board appointment, I continued to attend Sunday dinners. I want to be precise about this because I have been asked since why I did not simply stop going. The answer is that I needed to be certain. Not certain of what Autumn had done. I had known that since July. Certain that I had done everything right. That I had not been reactive. That I had not been reckless. That when the thing finally resolved itself, I would be able to look at every step I had taken and find nothing to be ashamed of. So I went to Sunday dinner. I brought wine, a bottle of Sancerre that Autumn would photograph and post without crediting me, which I found consistent with everything else. I helped with the dishes. I listened to Autumn describe a brand negotiation with a wellness company that would eventually go nowhere, as they all did. I watched Wesley laugh at his own jokes, and I watched my mother smooth over every silence. And I said nothing about the fraud report or the attorney or the 4 months of board review that had nearly cost me something I'd spent a decade building. I did this for 7 more Sunday dinners before I quietly stopped going. There was no fight, there was no announcement. I simply was not there one Sunday and then another, and eventually my absence became its own kind of answer to a question no one in that house had thought to ask. By February of 2024, Autumn and Wesley were carrying $97,000 in combined revolving debt. The white 2022 Cadillac Escalade was still leased. The Instagram account was still posting about generational abundance and choosing your circle wisely and vision boards that curated a life that existed primarily in the caption. They had 4,200 followers. Autumn considered this significant. On February 2, 2024, they submitted an application to Hartwell Community Bank's online portal for a $52,000 personal debt consolidation loan. The income documentation they submitted was irregular. Wesley's HVAC sales commissions varied considerably from month to month, and Autumn's blogger income was inconsistent in ways that flagged immediately during underwriting. Per bank protocol, any application above $50,000 with an irregular income flag is routed for review by a board officer before final disposition. The flagged file landed on my desk on the morning of February 6, 2024, a Tuesday. 9:47 in the morning. I opened the folder. I saw the name. I read the application from the first line to the last without stopping. Then I set it down. Then I picked up my phone and called Lorraine Vega. She said, "Are you sure you want to be in that room?" I said, "I am the only person who should be in that room." She said, "Then let's make sure it's done exactly right." I spent the next 3 days reviewing every procedural requirement for board officer involvement in a loan review meeting. I documented the conflict of interest disclosure I would be required to make. I confirmed with the bank's general counsel that my presence was appropriate given that I was recusing myself from the lending decision while preserving my standing in the separate legal matter. Everything was done by the book. It had to be. This was not a moment for improvisation. On the morning of February 6th, I arrived at Hartwell Community Bank at 9:15. I spoke briefly with Arthur Finch, the bank's head of consumer lending, a composed, precise man of 54 who had reviewed the file himself the previous day and understood, without requiring a lengthy explanation, the nature of what was about to occur. I told him I would be joining the meeting last. He nodded. He said, "I'll have the notes associate in the room." I thanked him. I went to my office and I reviewed the 41-page fraud report one more time, not because I did not know it, but because I read everything twice. At 9:47, I walked down the hall to the fourth-floor conference room and opened the door. Autumn and Wesley were already seated on the far side of the table. Autumn was wearing a gray blazer over a cream blouse. Her hair was down. She had a portfolio in front of her, soft leather, cream-colored, the kind of thing that photographs well. Arthur Finch was at the end of the table. The compliance associate was to his left with a laptop open. I walked to the chair directly across from my sister, set my portfolio on the table and sat down. Autumn's face went completely still. Not pale, still. The kind of still that happens when the body receives information the mind has not yet processed. Wesley looked at Autumn. Autumn did not look at Wesley. She looked at me. I looked at Arthur Finch. I opened my portfolio. I said, "Good morning. I'm Vivian Alcott, board director. I'll be reviewing your application today." Autumn said, "Vivienne." I said, "Ms. Mine. Alcott Pruitt. I need to ask you to hold your questions until I've completed the review." I did not raise my voice. I said it the way I say everything, at the same pace I use in every board meeting on every ordinary Tuesday. I opened the file. I read the application aloud. The stated income figures, the combined debt load, the purpose of the loan as listed, debt consolidation. I read each line with the same attention I give to every document I have ever reviewed in 12 years of this work. Wesley's left hand was flat on the table. It did not move. Autumn's jaw was set. She looked at the table in front of her. When I finished reading the application, I set it down. I reached into my portfolio and removed a second document, 41 pages, bound. I slid it across the table to Arthur Finch. Not to Autumn. To Arthur. I said, "Mr. Finch, before we proceed, I need to disclose a conflict of interest and a matter of existing legal record. In 2022, I filed a fraud complaint against this applicant for identity theft in connection with a prior loan originated through a predecessor institution now under this bank's umbrella. That complaint is currently active. I am recusing myself from the lending decision. I am not recusing myself from the legal matter." The compliance associate stopped typing. Arthur Finch picked up the fraud report. He read the first page. He turned to the second. He turned to the third. He did not look up. Autumn's left hand, which had been resting on her cream portfolio, curled slowly inward. I closed my portfolio. I stood. I looked at Autumn for the first time directly, not past her. Not at the table, at her. And I said, I hope you brought a different kind of attorney than a loan officer. Then I walked out. I went back to my office. I sat down. I poured water from the pitcher on my desk. I drank it. Outside my window, the Columbus skyline was flat and gray in the February light, and the day was proceeding entirely as planned. Autumn and Wesley waited in that conference room for 40 minutes. The loan was denied. A compliance officer entered and asked them not to leave the building while certain procedural matters were addressed. Autumn's personal attorney, who had not been present at the meeting, was contacted by phone. Wesley did not speak once during the wait, according to the associate's notes. Autumn asked twice to speak with someone. She was told politely that the relevant parties would be in touch through appropriate channels. 3 days later, Autumn's attorney contacted Lorraine. Wesley retained his own counsel separately. The fraud case, which had been in documentation and negotiation since 2022, moved into formal settlement proceedings. It was resolved 4 months later. The terms are not something I discuss publicly. What I will say is that the resolution was complete, that it was documented, and that it was handled entirely through the proper channels in the way that every step of this had been handled. Carefully, patiently, and by the book. My mother called me twice in the week after the meeting. I did not answer. She left a voicemail on the second call. She said, I don't understand why you would do this to your own family. I listened to it once, standing at my kitchen counter, at 7 in the morning with my coffee still in my hand. I did not call her back. Not because I was angry, because there was nothing in the voicemail that required a response that I was willing to give. Autumn sent a text 2 weeks after the meeting. It said, Can we just not make this a whole thing? It was, I thought, the most precise thing she had ever said to me. She had spent 20 years not making things a whole thing. Not making the cosign a whole thing. Not making the promotion dinner a whole thing. Not making the $52,000 a whole thing. The pattern had always been the same. The harm was done quietly. The accounting was avoided loudly. And the person who had been harmed was positioned as the one creating the problem by noticing. I did not respond. In the months that followed, the family reorganized itself around the silence the way families do. Carefully, without acknowledgement, testing the weight of each step before committing to it. My father sent a birthday card in April. He did not mention any of it. He asked about the weather in Columbus. I sent a card back. It was civil. It was what we had always been to each other, fundamentally. Two people who cared in the language of envelopes and brief handwriting. The only message I saved was from my cousin Merlene. She sent a text in March 6 weeks after the meeting. It said only, I always knew you were the one. 4 words. I read them standing in my car in a parking garage on a Wednesday afternoon, and I stood there for a moment longer than I needed to. Then I drove home. I have thought a great deal, in the months since, about what this story is and is not. It is not a story about winning. I did not experience the resolution of that fraud case as a victory in any way that felt clean or satisfying. What I felt, mostly, was tired. The specific tiredness of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally been allowed to set it down. Not triumph, just the absence of weight. What I know now, that I did not know at 26, is this: restraint is not weakness. Patience is not passivity. There is a version of silence that is defeat. The silence of someone who has given up, who has decided that nothing they do will matter, who has swallowed their own story until it has no voice left in it. That is not the silence I kept. The silence I kept was the silence of someone who was working, who was building, who had made a decision at some point in those early years that the way she lived and the way she moved and the way she spent her money and her attention and her time was going to be the argument. Not words, not announcements at Sunday dinner, not posts about generational abundance. The work itself. Autumn used my name like it was something she owned, and in a way she was right. Because for a long time, I had been giving it away, sending money home, co-signing leases, showing up at tables where I was managed rather than loved, offering my credit, my loyalty, my presence, my silence, as though they were resources that existed for other people's use. The fraud was not the beginning of the taking. It was the end of it. The moment she went so far that the paper trail became undeniable even to me. The difference, in the end, was not that I had built something and she had not. The difference was that by the time she tried to spend my name, I had made it worth something she couldn't afford. I keep showing up now, to the board, to the work, to the properties I manage and the files I review and the spreadsheet I have kept updated, without exception, for 14 years. I show up with the same discipline I have always brought to things that matter, quietly, without announcement, because that is what building actually looks like, on the days when no one is photographing it. I want to leave you with one question, and I mean it sincerely. Have you ever kept showing up for someone after you already knew? Not because you were naive, but because you needed to leave clean. If you have, I think you understand exactly what I mean when I say that the hardest part was not the fraud case or the board review, or the meeting on the fourth floor. The hardest part was those 7 Sunday dinners. The wine I brought, the dishes I helped with, the conversations I had about brand deals that never materialized, doing all of it right until I was done.